They were good stories, and he was a psychologist. He worked with kids. You know, when some parents sometimes want me to speak to their kids. When parents ask me to speak to the kids, you understand this, of course. I tell them the parents have to be there. And if you want to bring your kid there, I should talk to your kid, no problem. But you have to be there. You can't just send your kid. I will not talk to a kid without the parents being there. My library, my doors are glass. You know, they're not solid doors. In my office downstairs.
It's like a woman going to a gynecologist nowadays.
Okay.
You always have to pull another person in.
That's right. My office downstairs, I have a door, but you'd have to move 5 chairs in to close that door. I never close it. You've been in my office, it doesn't, I just don't close it. I don't close it.
Scores of times.
Okay.
It's not just gyno, by the way, it's any doctor.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to say that, you know, he said he's innocent. Okay, let's see his defense. Let's examine the evidence. Let's let the authorities do their job. And then when he took his life, and again, could be he's innocent, could be he wrote there, I'm not guilty of any of these things, but I know I'll never be able to clear my name. I understand that. And he didn't have the strength to reinvent himself. I got that. People have, not everybody can. And he just says, I'll deal with it in Shemayim. It's a tragedy all the way around.
But he took his life.
Yeah, he took his life.
I didn't know.
He went to his grave of his son. His son died of cancer a few years ago, and he shot himself. And he took his life in Israel.
Oh, wait, who are you talking
Time Wilder.
about? Oh, okay.
But so
That's someone else.
Shamayim, you think that's going to solve a case in Shamayim, Rabbi?
I don't know what's going to be. There's stories, he says, of great situations that were solved in Shemayim, but I don't know what's going to
No, that's not what I said.
That's what
No, I said there are stories of doing a beit din here in this olam against somebody who's already up there.
I've had it the reverse. I've heard stories, but
Oh, what? Or they're pulling somebody up from down here.
Yeah.
Up there. Oh, wow.
Whoa.
Whoa. Whoa. That's more freaky. I think that's
That's
much
more
more freaky than the other way around.
Parshas Va'era. Let's go into this some Torah. There are things I'm going to tell you tonight that I'm sure you've never heard. I've already worked on next week Parshas Bo. I already typed up 4 pages of things that will blow your mind. But tonight, especially, we'll go step by step, and we'll see what we can accomplish in getting insight in this week's Parsha. And we were left with some questions from last week that we tried to answer, that this week I have some answers different than what we said last week. So it's going to be interesting to see. Vaydaber Elokim el Moshe. Let's begin. Hashem speaks to Moshe. Elokim is Hashem's name of Midat
Adin.
Adin. When it says Elokim, you know it's going to be a difficult conversation. Last week Moshe said to Hashem, I don't get it. Why did you hire me? I'm not fit for the job. I'm not qualified. I told you I wasn't qualified. I went to Paro. Not only did I not make matters better, they didn't even stay the same. Matters got worse. I'm not your guy. Now, if you go to your boss and you have a conversation like this with him, chances are he's going to fire you.
Right.
End of story. He's going to say, you're right, you're not the man. Enjoy your day, goodbye, severance pay. Finished. Hashem says to Moshe, nice try, you're not fired. You were groomed for this job. You are qualified for this job. You will do the job. I am not letting you off the hook. Moshe tried to get fired 6 times. Did it work?
No.
Never once. Okay. So let's get it straight over here. Hashem is saying to Moshe, nobody is as qualified as you. Then he says, Va'era, I appeared to Abraham, El Yitzchak, El Yaakov, Bekel Shaddai. Ushmi Hashem lo nadati lehem. I made promises to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Did they ever see my promises come true? No. Did they ever question me? No. I promised Abraham the land will be yours. He had to bury his wife. He had to pay 400 shekel over la socher. He paid top dollar. Did he come and say, Hashem, I don't get it. You promised me the land and I got to buy it? Never once. Okay? Rashi is bizarre. Rashi says, Va'era el Avraham. So what does Rashi say? El ha'avos. What did we think? Hashem was saying, I spoke to Avraham. You thought it was Avraham Birnbaum?
No.
And Yitzchak was Yitzchak Moskowitz? And Yaakov was Yaakov Chaimov? Is that what Moshe thought? I mean, who did he think Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were?
Yeah.
It says Elo Avos. I mean, what's Rashi telling me? So the Meforshim all ask this, and they say something very interesting. They bring down the famous story with Rab Zusha. Rab Zusha was a Hasidic Rebbe together with Rabbi Elimelech from Lezhensk. Lezhensk. They were brothers. The Rabbi Elimelech, and Reb Zusha. And Reb Zusha used to say that in Shamayim, they're never going to ask me, how come you were not like the Baal Shem Tov? You know why?
What?
Because my answer will be, because I'm not the Baal Shem Tov. If Hashem says to me, why were you not like the Chofetz Chaim? I'm not the Chofetz Chaim. I mean, what do you ask me? Why am I not like the Chofetz Chaim? I'm not Reb Moshe Feinstein, I'm not Rabbi Kiva Eger, I'm not the Chofetz Chaim. But you know what I'm afraid of? Hashem will say to me, why were you not like Reb Zusha? That means you weren't even yourself. You had such abilities, and you failed to live up to your own standard. I don't care about the Baal Shem Tov, but why weren't you you? You had such great qualifications. You had such talent. Why didn't you perform? Hashem says to Moshe, you know why Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov were who they were? Because they pioneered a path that once they walked down that road, any Jew could walk down that road. Avraham went down to Egypt. He left Egypt b'rechush gadol. Because he did that, the Jews will do that. And Yitzchak was Moshe Nefesh, therefore Jews can be Moshe Nefesh, they can die in their belief in Hashem. And so can Yaakov. The Avos were called Avos because everything they did came part of the DNA of their children. Moshe, if Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov could do it, you can do it because you're one of their descendants. And to say, but I'm not Avraham, I'm not Yitzchak, is not relevant.
Right.
If Avraham could walk down that street, that means any Jew could walk down that street. So Hashem said to Moshe, I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They, in Bereshis, created 100 successful missions. Any one of them will help you defeat Paro. So therefore, your arguments are irrelevant. You are the man. You were groomed for this job from the moment you were born. The moment you were born, you were groomed from this job, and you will be able to accomplish it. And then the Torah goes into detail. He says, "V'gam ani shamati nachas b'nei Yisrael." I have heard their cries. Lochein emor, tell them, ani Hashem, I am the God. Hashem is Rachamim. I keep my word. V'hotzeisi eschem mitachas sivlas Mitzrayim. The slavery will stop. When did it stop? During the year of the Makos. The Makos took about 12 months. During those 12 months, they were not slaves. V'itzalti eschem. I will take you out. That's when they left Egypt. Pesach night. V'go'alti eschem bizro anetuyo. You'll see an outstretched hand. When did that take place? 7 days later. The Yam Suf. V'lakati eschem li la'om. I'll take you as a people. When did that take place? Har Sinai. When I gave them the Torah. And then he says, V'hevesi eschem el ha'oretz. I'll bring you into the land that's Eretz Yisrael.
40 years later.
40 years later.
Wow.
And to a different generation.
Right.
So because of that, at the Seder, we have 5 cups of wine, but we only drink 4. Because the people who left Egypt successfully experienced the 4. The Shonot of Geulah, the 5th one is for Mashiach's time.
Right.
Kosher Eliyahu. I said this to you many times, that the slavery was 86 years. The gematria of the word kos, cup, is equal to 86.
86, right.
Elohim is gematria 86. 5 times 86 is 430, which is how much the time was from the Bris Ben Absarim till they left Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's all the gematrias all add up. Okay? So it goes, it's unbelievable. The Maharal says, you know why we have 4 cups of wine? I'll tell you why he says, because there were 4 mothers. What do the 4 mothers have to do with 4 cups of wine? Because the Maharal says, I said last week, we got out of Egypt because Yitzchus Nashim Tzidkonios, righteous women. Remember last week, who were the heroes? Shifra, Pua, Yocheved, Miriam,
Bitya.
Bas Paro, Bitya, Zipporah. It was all women. Last week was all women. If Jewish women come and say the Torah is biased towards men, just say read Parsha Shemos. That tells you that everything was all about the women. The Maharal says 4 cups of wine because we have 4 mothers. Simple as all that. But then we're going to take it a step further. So now it's set. Hashem says to Moshe, and Moshe says, but you know what? They're not going to listen to me. How will Paro listen to me? The Jews will want to listen and they can't listen because they have no time. How is Paro going to listen? Then it says a crazy thing. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron. Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron. Vayitzavem el bnei Yisrael ve'el Paro. He says, I have a message for both Jews and Paro. Get rid of your slaves. Lahotzias b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Yisrael. No more slaves. Now, I got the message for Paro. What are the Jews? He's telling the Jews, no more slaves. I'm going to tell you a Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah was Rav Meir Simcha from Davinsk. He wrote a Sefer on Chumash that the claim was written with Ruach HaKodesh. And I'll break it into you, I'll show you what he says in a moment. Right afterwards, Sheni, in the middle of nowhere, it says, Eile Rosh Beis Avosav. These are the children. You have Reuven, goes to a bunch of Reuven's children. Shimon, bunch of Shimon's children. Then it goes to Levi, Gershon, Kohos, Merari, Amram, Yitzhar, Amram married Yocheved, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, Aaron married Elisheva, Bas Aminadov, and then that's Moshe and Aaron, that's Aaron and Moshe. Doesn't go through anybody else. Just Reuven, Shimon, and Levi in the middle of nowhere. Just throws it right in. By now we all know who Moshe is. We know who Moshe's father was, his mother was. We knew that from last week. So Rabbi Victor Miller said a shocking answer. He said that if you look at the religions of the world, when somebody from a particular religion came and changed nature, the course of nature, 10 makos, miracles that boggle the mind, sticks into snakes and leprosy and all these other things. You know what the people began to believe? This man is not human. Who's this man? He's the son of God. He's from God. God had a child. So Rabbi Victor Miller says, the Torah stops right now and says, hold on guys. Moshe is going to do crazy things that you'll never see. I just want you to know, there's Reuven, there's Shimon, there's Levi. Levi had a child. There's Amram and Yocheved. Moshe has brothers and sisters. He has cousins. He has uncles and aunts. He's not a God. He's human. He's as human as they come. That means the Torah stops for a moment and says he's as human as you can imagine. Fascinating.
That is shocking.
That's shocking. Then steps in the Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah says, if you ask anyone which tribe were not slaves in Egypt, what's the answer?
Levi.
Levi. Everybody knows that answer.
Right.
He says that's not the correct answer. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi were not slaves. Really? I was shocked also. This is a Meshech Chochmah. It says it on the spot.
Makes sense.
He says, and wait till I tell you why he says it. Then he says, because they were not slaves, they were considered aristocratic, like the upper echelon. They had houseboys, they had a butler, they had someone who did the cook, they had a chef, they had babysitters, maitre d's, all Jewish slaves. So these Shvatim, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, had Jewish slaves working for them. So Hashem says to Moshe, Moshe, go to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi and tell them, get rid of all your slaves. Because if I go to send you to Paro and say to Paro, send the Jews free, you know what Paro's going to say? What are you telling me? The Jews have slaves. They can have slaves and I can't have Jewish slaves? You know, what's good for them is good for me.
Their slaves was Egyptians?
So Hashem says to Moshe, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, tell these children of Israel, get rid of your slaves. That's the first second. Then the Meshech Chochmah says, and why was Reuben, Shimon, and Levi not enslaved? Levi, we always say, because Yosef gave favoritism to the priests of Mitzrayim. The Meshech Chochmah says, you know why they were not enslaved? Because they never got a bracha from Yaakov.
No.
No bracha from Yaakov means they had no protection. Had they become slaves, the slavery would have broken them because they had no protection from a bracha from Yaakov. So Hashem arranged that Reuven, Shimon, and Levi were not slaves. But then he says that because they were not slaves, they didn't get a nachala in Israel. Reuven got on this side of the Jordan River, not over here. Shimon got nothing, and Levi got nothing. So he says, because they were enslaved, they didn't get a portion in Israel. But because they didn't get a bracha from Yaakov, I couldn't make them slaves. So that was a Meshech Chochmah that I had never seen before. I mean, and I've gone through the Meshech Chochmah. It was just so amazing that I saw that. Then the Meshech Chochmah doesn't stop there. Then the Meshech Chochmah says, you know, we have these 4 Lashonos of Geula, so we have 4 cups of wine at the Seder. So he says, why do we have 4 cups of wine at the Seder? There's no meal throughout the entire calendar year that you have a chiyuv to drink 4 cups of wine. And remember, there are shiurim. How big does the cup have to be? If you're a real brisker, you know, if you come from Far Rockaway, you use a really big cup, you know, and then they don't just drink half the cup, they want to drink all the cup down, and he drinks 13%, you know, his wine. I mean, I'm just letting you know what he does. He says, you know, you're half drunk at the Seder. By the time you're through the 3rd cup of wine, you're tipsy.
He's chilling.
Right? So, you know, they're already mixing it with grape juice. So the Meshech Chochmah says something that's crazy. He says, you have a Seder, let's say you have 15 people at the Seder. If each person has to drink 4 cups of wine, you know what you're going to have on your table? 20 bottles of wine. If you have 20 bottles of wine, you know who you're not going to have at your Seder? Someone not Jewish. Because if someone not Jewish touches the bottle of wine, what's going to happen to the wine? Because they don't believe in mevushal wine. They believe in the real stuff, you know, not the mevushal wine. He says the whole Egyptian experience was because the Jews left Goshen and got mixed up with the Goyim. Therefore, the Seder has 4 cups of wine to make it impossible to have a non-Jew at your Seder.
But that's only after Purim it happened, no?
What happened after Purim?
That we're not allowed to drink wine.
No, it was always an issue of that. When the Gezeros came, that's a different question. But the Meshech Chochmah says there was always this unwritten rule. You cannot have a non-Jew at your Seder. It was always the unwritten rule. He goes even further.
Purpose or
He says that part of it was for the wine. Go further. You have the Korban Pesach.
That is.
It says clearly, Kol Ben Nechar, a non-Jew, cannot eat the Korban Pesach.
Even a Jew without Brit Milah.
Arel can't eat it. So
They can be invited, but not eating from.
the Meshech Chochmah says that you cannot invite a non-Jew to your
Yeah,
Seder.
but not to drink from the cup of the Kiddush, not to eat from the food.
don't drink.
He says, we see from
I don't know,
this
I
is-
heard in Israel that they can invite if you have.
Okay, I'm just telling you what the Meshech Chochmah says. He's of the opinion that you should not invite. He had a few interesting things, the Meshech Chochmah. Meshech Chochmah was of the opinion that when you have your glass that you have your wine in, should be glass, not silver. We talk about that. Silver is supposed to be very nice. We got all your rich stuff, all your rich things. He says you should be able to see the red wine, you know, to see dam, you know, all the different things. So he says that the 4 cups of wine were not to get you drunk, was to make it impossible to have a non-Jew. And that's why you have the Korban Pesach. Then, listen to this. This is a true story I'm going to tell you in a moment. When a person converts to Judaism, what does it take? So we learn it out from the Egyptian experience. If you're a man, you have to have Brit Milah, which happened in Makatz Choshech. Then you have to have Mikvah, which was the Yam Suf. Then you have to have Kabbalat HaTorah, which was Har Sinai. There is a 4th thing you need. Most people don't know this.
It's Korban, right?
Korban. How did a person who converts has to bring a Korban.
Masechet Shkalim.
Right. And generally, in halacha, if you look, the korban they have to bring is the korban pesach, because that's what was part of the conversion process. So
So they held everybody till Pesach?
they held everybody till Pesach. Today we don't have that, So a person converts, it's like a conditional conversion, that when the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, they're going to bring the Korban Pesach. I say this to you because about 10 years ago, I was involved in a conversion for a young lady, and she was in the mikvah, and we were outside, and before she dunks, before she goes in, we have to ask her certain questions. You know what Shabbos is, you know what Kosher is. This was like 2 weeks before Pesach. So I asked her that, God willing, when the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt, are you ready to bring and eat the Korban Pesach? And she said to me, she answered back to us, the rabbis, she says, no, I'm a vegetarian. I said, okay, but part of the conversion process is you have to bring a korban, and we assume it's the Korban Pesach, and it's one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. It's a dessert. You don't have to eat a lot. You just have to take a bite. Are you ready to take a bite from the Korban Pesach? She says, I'm a strict vegetarian. I will never, ever take a bite from the Korban Pesach.
Wow.
And we didn't do the conversion.
Bye, bye.
I said,
That's kosher.
But Rabbi, they say it's two birds.
That's kosher.
No, it's not
this
about
is-
that.
if
It's
you
about
look at the halacha, it
sacrifice
talks about
yourself.
the Korban Pesach.
Sacrificing yourself is Korban Pesach. And if she
again,
didn't want to do it, it means that she can fell down the road.
Correct. It's
Just
like
because she had
there's a
a
halacha, mumra l'dorecha. If a person says, I'll keep 612 mitzvahs, one mitzvah I won't keep, you can't
You don't
convert.
convert it.
that's the right, and you don't do
You
it.
can't do it. You're stuck. So
That's a
that
problem.
was that was a story that happened that wasn't very popular that day, but not everyone was
That's a
happy.
no-go.
But I walked away. I don't know what happened. Maybe they converted her afterwards. I was not involved with it.
Reform,
I walked
for
away.
sure.
I walked away. Then listen to this from Rav Schwab. Also fascinating. It says that Moshe Aaron Moshe. Then it says in the Torah, it just out of nowhere, it says, and by the way, Moshe ben Shmonim Shana, Moshe was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 years old when they stood before Paro. Now that's unusual. Yes, Paro asked Yaakov how old he was, but we never have really ages in the Torah. Nowhere does it say in the Torah, and Yitzchak was 60 or 40 years old when he went to the Akedah, or Yaakov was 63 years old when he took the brachos from his father Yitzchak. So Rav Schwab said something fascinating. Rav Schwab says, imagine if someone comes forward and says to you, I am a Jew, my last name is Schwartz, I was born in Berlin, in a hospital in Berlin in 1943. What would you think about that person's statement?
Lie,
Not
because
Can't
there's
be.
no, of course.
It's a lie.
If you say in the ghetto, they believe it.
Yeah, but in Berlin in 1943, in the height of World War II,
That was the blitz, isn't it?
a Jew being born in the hospital and is alive today? Can't be.
There's no way.
The Torah says Moshe and Aaron, when they came before Paro the first time, said, oh, by the way, remember 80 years ago you made this gezerah, all Jewish boys should be dead? Just want you to know how successful